Hello and welcome to Tech Deals October 2019 PC Build Guide, $580. This is an extremely good value for a 1080p gaming PC or just a general use computer at this price point. I have a variety of components on the table. I'm going to take you on a tour of them, why I picked them, mention a couple of other alternatives you could pick to either raise or lower this a bit, and then I'm going to show you some benchmarks of what this computer can do in several different games. Linked in the video description below will be links to Amazon, Newegg, and eBay for all of these components. Those are affiliate links. They do support the channel. If you found this useful, informative, helpful, and you want to use it to start your PC building experience, please consider using those links. It does support the channel at no extra cost to you. You can also support us for just $2 on Patreon. That link is in the video description below as well. You get access to the Tech Deals Discord, a great community of people, and the knowledge that you're supporting what we do in this wonderful sponsor-free video. First, let me start off by telling you that everything in this build today is new except for one thing. The video card is used, and that's to get us value for the money at this price point. I'll talk about a new option, and I'll actually talk about two different used options, but everything else is new. Let's start off with the processor, the basis of any PC build. Ryzen 5 2600, 6 cores, 12 threads, $120. That is a phenomenal value for the money. It blows away anything from Intel, and yes, I know Zen 2's out, and yes, I know the Ryzen 5 3600 is faster, but this is almost half the price, and it's not half the performance. If you've got $500, $600, maybe even $700 to spend, this is a better value for the money and lets you put your money into other components. It comes with an included stock cooler, and I fully recommend you use it. It's not the best stock cooler in the world, but it's absolutely plenty to run this CPU without a problem, and it's free. We need a motherboard to install our CPU on, and this is where the options get kind of interesting. On the desk here, I have an upgrade option, which is the MSI B450 Tomahawk. This is a full-size ATX board. It is, in fairness, not what's included in the $580 price point. It's here because I have the box for it. I don't have the box for the other two choices. The two choices included at the $580 price point are the MSI B450 Bazooka V2, which is a micro ATX board, or a Gigabyte Aorus M B450, also micro ATX board. Both of them are in about the $80 to $85 price point. Both of them have 4 RAM slots, decent VRM cooling, an M.2 slot, decent ports and options on the back, RGB lighting if you care. They're nice boards. You can go cheaper, but I wouldn't. There are $50 to $60 boards that are stripped of every feature in the world. I think spending an extra $10 or $20 to get a mid-range board is worth it. This is sort of on the upper end range of B450s, and again, as I said, it's here because I have one. But I would recommend for a build at this price point to get one of the two micro ATX boards, and I will link both of those down in the video description below. There is, to be completely honest, no reason to get an X470 board at this price point. You can, they're a little bit more money, and I know the idea is, well, maybe you'll upgrade it in the future, but if you're on this level of build, if you're on this budget, if you go and put an X470 in here, you're going to eat up so much of your budget putting a nice motherboard in, you're going to have to start cutting other things out unless you can increase your budget. So I think the $80 price point is the right place to be. After CPU and motherboard, that leaves us with system RAM. In my opinion, there's really only one choice for a build at this price point, 16 gigabytes of RAM. And for ease of installation and guaranteed compatibility, I would go with DDR4 3000. It's currently about $60 for the non-RGB version. I have an RGB version here because, again, that's what was on the shelf. But I'll have links down below to, it's about $60 for 16 gigs of RAM. At the DDR4 3000 clock speed, they're all going to work. 3200 works like 95% of the time, but 3000 works all of the time. And this way you don't have to worry about which brand of RAM you buy and which motherboard you buy because they're all going to work. At the 3200, it's a little bit of hit and miss. You can go more and less in RAM capacity, but short version, don't. 8 gigabytes is not cheap enough, and frankly, the 8 gigabytes being enough for gaming train left probably 2 years ago, and it really is gone in 2019. 32 gigs, there's no budget in this price point for 32 gigs, so it really is 16 gigs of RAM. If you already have some RAM or you find a really cheap deal on DDR4 2666, that's fine. 2666 is really not much slower than 3000. I've done a video on RAM speed, but I wouldn't go below 2666 if you can help it. And of course, if you find a good deal on 3200, you're welcome to, but it may or may not work. So we have our CPU, motherboard, RAM. Now we need some storage for our computer, and this is really where you can start customizing your custom PC. I love to say in these videos that custom PCs are custom. This is a build guide. This is designed to give you an idea of where to start. But of course, absolutely, make changes. Change brand preferences, change a motherboard, or change from Corsair to G.Skill, or change from Gigabyte to MSI, or vice versa. It's your computer, build it however you want. This is a starting guide. For this price point, I went with a 480 gigabyte ADATA SU635 SSD. These are available for under $50, and it's good enough performance for a machine at this price point. They're not as fast as like an SU700 or an SU800. They're not a super premium drive, but they're a lot less expensive than the premium drives. They also have guaranteed compatibility. It's a SATA drive. It just screws into the port in basically any case. You don't have to worry about mounting it to your motherboard. If you're okay to spend an extra $10 or $15, you can find M.2 NVMe drives in the 500 gig size for about $10 or $15 more than this. I do recommend them if you don't mind spending the money, but to keep this to 580, I had to go with the SATA drive. You can also go with a larger drive. A 1 terabyte drive will fit in this budget if you leave the 2 terabyte hard drive that I've included out. This is either a Western Digital or a Seagate 2 terabyte 5400 RPM drive. These are available for under $50 at the moment. That gives you enough space for a decent game library, personal files, folders, etc. If you leave the hard drive out, you can increase the SSD to 1 terabyte for the same price point, but then you go from 2.5 terabytes of total storage to just 1. If you're okay with that, great, you'll have amazing performance, and of course you can always add a hard drive later. But I understand that a lot of people will find that 1 terabyte total isn't enough, which is why I made the split compromise here of going with a hard drive and an SSD. Please do not go smaller than a 480 or 512 gig SSD. I know they're cheaper. I know it's tempting to save $20 or $30 and get a 240 or 256 gig SSD. Don't. Modern drives at those sizes are noticeably slower than the 500 gig versions. Didn't always used to be the case, but the modern spins and revisions with the higher density NAND chips mean they have fewer channels and the performance drop-off is real. The buffers and the cache and the available split memory channels to boost performance are cut down, so you will experience a reduction in performance. The other thing is Windows gets larger, programs get larger, and if you go with a 250 gig drive, you have no room to put anything on it. Once you put Windows on it and your programs and a few other things, I mean, you have room for what, one game these days? There are numerous games that are over 100 gigs, so I don't think that's worth the savings. Put your 2 or 3 most played games on the SSD, put the rest on the hard drive. Normally at this point in the build, we'd be going to the graphics card. We're going to save the best for last because there are some interesting choices with our graphics card. Let's get the case and the power supply out of the way really quick. I have budgeted $50 in this build for a power supply, a 500 watt, 80 plus bronze certified power supply, decent quality. I have a Cooler Master here, Cooler Master, Corsair, EVGA, take your pick. They're all fine at this price point. You do not need over a 500 watt power supply. Frankly, a 400 watt power supply is fine, but you don't really save that much, $5 or $10. This is kind of the nice sweet spot in terms of price and the ability to say upgrade your graphics card in the future. As far as case goes, there are a million cases to pick from. It is an extremely personal choice. This is a Cooler Master MB511. It is $65. It comes with 2 2.5-inch SATA drive SSD mounts on the back, 2 3.5-inch hard drive trays in the bottom, 1 2.5-inch SSD tray in the front, room for a 360 millimeter liquid cooler or multiple fans in the front, a 240 or a 280 liquid cooler on the top. It has excellent mesh ventilation. It comes with a rear fan already installed. It is thick enough so that if you install fans on the top, it doesn't block the motherboard. The Cooler Master's really done a good job fixing their small case designs recently. 2-3 years ago, some of these were kind of iffy, but this is nice. all mesh in the front, all the airflow you could want. It's a nicely built case for $65. I will be showing this in a full build and a full review at some point in the future. They make an RGB version of this with tempered glass for like $20 or $25 more. If you want RGB with some fans included in the front and glass on the side, spend a little bit more and get it. Cases are very personal. NZXT, Fractal Design, Corsair, Cooler Master, you pick. You pick the case that you like the look of and that fits your components. It really doesn't matter so long as you don't go on the extreme bottom end of cases. Do not buy the $30 cases. They're $30 for a reason. Exposed bare metal, flimsy, very, very thin metal. They're cheap. Don't put a nice computer in a cheap case. That's just mean to your components. Circling back around, graphics card time. This is an RX 580 8GB graphics card, and this thing is a beast of a value. You can currently find these for $100 on eBay. Not just one, not just two, not just a few lucky bids, but dozens available. Buy it now for around $100, with several of them under $100. But if you want a premium cooler, if you want a factory overclock card, maybe it comes with a retail box and maybe from a little bit more reputable seller, you might spend $110 or $115 at most. But there's a bunch available, and I'll show you a list here as I'm talking, for about $100. For that price point, this is an unbeatable value for the money. The dollar cost per frame per second on the RX 580 at that price point is amazing. 8GB of VRAM. There is zero reason whatsoever to buy a 4GB card at this point. You'll save $5 or $10 in late 2019. Do not try and save $5 or $10 by getting a 4GB card. Get the 8GB card and give yourself room, because textures have grown in size. Now, the only downside to an RX 580 is that it's been around for a while. It's really a refresh of the RX 480, and you're going to have to start turning details down in some games. I'm going to show you some benchmarks here in just a second. I'll abbreviate them, but I'm going to show you detail settings and resolutions that are playable rather than just try to crush the card and show you, oh, well, yeah, look, see, this can't play Gears 5 at ultra detail. Well, that's silly. You shouldn't be trying to play Gears 5 at ultra detail on this. I'll show you that here in a second, but it's a great value. If, however, you look at these benchmark numbers and you want more performance, let me offer you a suggestion. For $100 more, you can currently buy a GTX 1070 on eBay from a bunch of different sellers, just like the 580 is. Now, the 1070 is about 50% faster than a 580, plus or minus 10% depending upon the game, benchmark, etc. They both have 8GB of RAM. And the first thing some of you might say is, wait, you said it was $200. That's $100. 200 is double of 100, but it's only 50% faster. I understand that. On a pure dollar cost per frame per second for the card, the 580 is a much better deal than the 1070. However, that 50% extra performance comes at the cost of $100 relative to your whole machine. This build, as you see, is $580. If you instead get a 1070 instead of a 580, the $580 build becomes $680, but you get 50% faster graphics. The CPU is fine. The Ryzen 5 2600 is absolutely plenty for either of these graphics cards. You're not going to be bottlenecked by your CPU in like 98% of only corner cases, but you'll be absolutely fine. I would put either of these graphics cards with the CPU. So if you want to spend 580, you'll get the numbers I'll show you here in just a second on the benchmarks. But if you're okay to spend $100 more and spend $680, get yourself a 1070, get up to 50% faster graphics, because again, it does depend upon which game you're playing and what the detail settings are. I will link to both of these graphics cards down in the video description below to eBay. Those will be buy it now, sorted, priced lowest to highest. Look through that list, find a card, find the one you prefer from the brand or the cooler or the manufacturer, the model, a superclock card, or maybe an Oris or an EVGA for the win. You'll definitely find a deal down there if you look through that. If you're watching this and you say, I don't want a used video card, I don't want an X-mining card, I don't want a card that somebody's had in an overheated computer, I only want new components. I understand. Here's the challenge to that. If you only want new components, you're going to spend more money. You can get a GTX 1660 Ti, which is going to run you closer to $300 and give you roughly this performance. That's kind of a hefty premium for a build of this level. You can do it, but you're going to spend like $280 to get what this does for $200. I'm trying to show you here the best value for the money if you don't mind buying a used card. On the AMD side, if you want to buy a new card, you can spend $320-ish and get an RX 5700, and that'll definitely give you a nice performance boost as well, but it's not going to be the same value per frame per second as an RX 580 is. The Vegas exist, but I would skip the Vegas at this point. The ones I've looked at on eBay, they aren't cheap enough for their performance and the heat and the noise they produce. And you put them in a case like this, you need to add more fans for ventilation. These are my recommendations. As I said before, custom PCs are custom. Build it your way. The links to everything will be down below. Now let me show you some benchmarks and show you what $580 does for you in late 2019. Our first game benchmark is actually not the new Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which frankly I don't play. I play Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which I haven't beaten, I've taken a break from. It's a shame because it is a fun game. I also chose it because it represents what you might choose to play on a value-oriented computer such as this, which may not be the latest and greatest games. You might say, well, I'll wait till games are 1 or 2 years old because I want to get a deal on them. I want to buy games when they're 50% off, when they're 75% off. If you buy every new game the day it launches, 10 new games will cost you what the whole computer does. Save your money, buy games when they're a year old, and you will get far more for your gaming dollar. So Assassin's Creed Syndicate's been out for a while. You can get it for very cheap these days. And as you can see here, the performance is excellent. We are playing at 1080p high detail, and we are nearly 90 frames per second. And look how gorgeous this game is. This is on a $580 computer. Sweet! I actually ended up playing a mission in this. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because I played for 22 minutes. I kind of got carried away here. It's so you forget what you're playing on. I mean, the reality is you start getting into the game, you start playing the game, you start killing enemies, you're doing missions. It is very easy to get all wrapped up in benchmarking and, oh, what are my frame rates and what's my 1% minimums and is there micro stutter and what's the frame pacing and do I have ultimate elite everything? You know, that's nice, but the reality is you're spending so much time and trouble worrying about stats and specs and numbers, and you're not just playing your game. Turn the benchmark off, turn the frame rate counter off, find something that is reasonably playable, and just enjoy your game. Now, I do, of course, have the real-time numbers up here you can see, and we are, in fact, using 6 of our cores, and we're using about 8.4 gigabytes of RAM, and all of our graphics card, of course. But yeah, I mean, it plays great. You can see the real-time benchmark running. The current benchmark, which at this point has been running for about 15 minutes, is at 83 frames per second average, 60 frames per second, 1% low, and 45 frames per second, 0.1% low. Yes, folks, we have gotten over 60 frames per second 99% of the time here. On an RX 580, on a second-gen Ryzen 5 2600. That's a deal. All right, let's take a look at another game. This is Call of Duty Black Ops 4 1080p high detail. I went through all the manual detail settings and made sure everything was either turned on or set to high and the various texture detail settings and everything else. I was a little bit impressed. I was expecting this to do 60 frames per second. I thought we'd get better, but this did really, really well. Now, I didn't because I'm not very good at this game, but I certainly got engaged in combat and went back and went back and went back. I did get several kills, so yay me, although we didn't end up winning this game. We are using well north of 50% of our CPU power, and this is why if I'm buying a new CPU in 2019 or going into 2020, it's going to be at least a 6-core chip. Because you can see here that we're definitely going up to and sometimes over 6 threads. We have a 12-thread processor. The graphics card, of course, is 100% used. If you get more graphics card, then yes, definitely you're going to want even more CPU power. But this is a nicely balanced match. Interestingly enough, and granted it's an AMD card so it doesn't take advantage of texture compression, notice that we're using 6.4 gigabytes of VRAM. Not all of it, but we're definitely using a bunch of it. A 6 gigabyte NVIDIA card would be enough because of texture compression, but yeah, 8 gigabytes is definitely better. And our main system RAM is at 9.5 gigabytes, which is also why not only is 16 gigabytes the absolute minimum, but if you're multitasking, then I would go beyond that. The performance is self-evident. We're doing 100 frames per second. To be sure, the respawns and everything else, they affect it a little bit, but the percentage of the game time that our respawns are relatively minor, all things considered. And of course, you can see the real-time performance here. Even with 2 characters in front of me and a gunfire going on, we're at about 85, there's 86 frames per second. We have a 1% real-time low of 63. Now, that's going to change, of course, because the total benchmark numbers are going to change, but you can see the numbers right here. We are over 60 frames per second, 99% of the time in Call of Duty Black Ops 4 multiplayer, at 1080p high detail on an RX 580. This computer is an incredible value for the money. Moving on to another one of my favorite games, we have Ghost Recon Wildlands. And this does have a built-in benchmark, but notice I'm not using it. This is all live gameplay testing here. I want to show you real world with 1% lows, which I know I don't do in my card comparison videos, but that's because doing this times 8 graphics cards would take absolutely forever, but I can do it when I'm just showing you the performance of one card. We're not getting as much performance in some of the other games, but we are doing an average of 60 frames per second, and it does tend to stick around that point. Now, the 1% lows most definitely are not going to be there. At the moment, our real-time 1% lows are at 42 frames per second. That's going to change, of course, because, well, we're in the middle of live benchmarking. But, let's make a left turn at Albuquerque. Our truck is all beat up, and we're being attacked by, like, everybody. So, run away! Run away! Run away! CPU usage, again, I cannot scream loudly enough. That 6 cores, 12 threads is my new minimum CPU. 816 is better. If you can afford a Ryzen 7 2700, great. But if this is your budget and this is the price point, then certainly a Ryzen 5 2600 is awesome. Look at our main system RAM usage. 12 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah, and everybody says 16 gigs is all that you need for gaming. It is. I mean, you can, absolutely. 100%. You absolutely can get by with 16 gigs. But if you're just playing the game, you're fine. But if you've got multiple monitors and you're watching Twitch streams while you're playing games, or you're trying to live stream games, then you'll need 32. At least in this game. This actually gets pretty rough when you're multitasking. VRAM usage, however, is way down from Black Ops 4, which is weird because this is a beautiful game and Black Ops 4 doesn't seem to justify all that VRAM, but it is what it is. Look at all that smoke and flames on the screen. You can see it's dragging down our average just slightly. We're under 60 frames per second. I did play this for about 15 minutes. It's completely, utterly, totally playable. There's nothing whatsoever about this that I would call unplayable at 1080p, high detail, in any stretch of the definition. Moving on to Rainbow Six Siege. Yes, I pulled this game out and did a mission. Don't laugh at my gameplay. I am horrible at this game. I mean, it's just tragic. I have no idea where anybody is. I can't score a kill to save my life. I'm watching experts play this game. I don't have any idea how they do it because the whole thing makes no sense to me whatsoever. However, the game's built-in benchmark does not fairly represent its performance and 1% lows, and I am only doing real live gameplay testing on these sorts of single system comparisons because I really, really want to give you an idea of what's possible. This is 1080p high detail. Your eyes do not deceive you. We are currently averaging 163 frames per second with a 132 frame per second 1% low and a 125, well, now 124 frame per second 0.1% low. Now, is it going to hold there? Well, yes and no. It's interesting. And yes, I probably stayed here too long. We do end up going inside. I actually lived quite a while, mostly because I didn't find any enemies. I did end up running around the building. I'll show you most of it, if not all of it. But I couldn't find the enemies. I was like, where is everybody? But again, I don't know the map. I don't know the game. It's tough to benchmark stuff like this when, frankly, you're like, what am I supposed to do? All right, let's go inside and see how that frame rate goes. It does dip down here. We're down at 144, 100 and, well, there's 150. It's all over the place, but you get a chance to see it. I could just throw a benchmark chart up, but this gives you a chance to see in real time how this performs. The fact that a $580 computer is doing over 144 frames per second average in a very, very popular tactical competitive shooter, that's wow. I mean, hey, if you are wondering what it takes to play this, no, you don't need RTX 2080 Ti's to do 144 frame per second gaming. Not in esports. These things are designed to run this well because otherwise people wouldn't play them. Because to be, truth be told, the market of people who buy $500 to $700 to $1,000 video cards is very, very tiny. The number of people who buy $100 to $200 video cards is really, really big. And games like this that are really big, this, Fortnite, Apex, etc., all have to run really, really well on relatively modest hardware, or nobody would play them. Moving right along, The Division 2. Another game with a built-in benchmark, but to heck with that, again, live gameplay. And I'm showing you a nice, intense firefight. This is a mission. It's one of the side missions you do on the streets. I've been meaning to get back and play this some more. I completed the first Division game, finished it start to finish. Way too much fun. If you've not played The Division 1, by all means do so. You don't have to play The Division 1 to play The Division 2, but why wouldn't you? They're the same game engine, the same world, the same concept. This is just tweaked up a bit. There is a story. It kind of matters and it kind of doesn't. Basically, your job is to run around and kill bad guys. That's the story in a nutshell. And as you can see here, we're getting nearly 100 frames per second. I'd like to call your attention to something else. Main system RAM usage. This isn't a problem at the moment, but it isn't going to hold. We are using over 15 gigabytes of main system RAM. The truth of the matter is this game will absolutely use over 16 gigabytes if you have it. Yes, I said it, and yes, a lot of people are going to go, what? When did 32 gigabytes become necessary? I didn't say necessary, I said useful. We're basically at the limit of RAM. Windows is never going to let you use 100% of your RAM, and so we're into the swap at this point, which isn't going to be reported in MSI Afterburner because MSI Afterburner doesn't report the Windows swap. It reports how much main system RAM you're being used. As far as VRAM goes, we're over 6 gigabytes of VRAM here, so either a 6 or an 8 gig card is what you're going to frankly want to. This is why I said earlier, don't bother with the 4 gig cards. You would not want to play this at 1080p high detail. I didn't mention that before. This is all 1080p high detail, so we're not even running Ultra and we're using 6.3 gigabytes of VRAM. So the 4 gigabyte cards, they were fine 3 years ago. In 2016, when I first covered VRAM usage, I said at the time, 3 to 4 gigs of VRAM was all you needed. And for 3 years it was. But in the past year, that's really, really started to change. At the beginning of this year, maybe to the midpoint of the year is where it started to change. And you can see here with several of these titles. Now, if you have a 4 gigabyte card, or if you get if somebody offers you a 4 gigabyte card for like 50 bucks, and you say, how am I supposed to turn that down? Don't. Okay, at 50 bucks I would take one, but you'll need to turn the texture detail. In general, that's the setting you're looking for. Turn textures to medium. That'll dramatically reduce the VRAM requirements and let you run all these modern games on a 4 gigabyte card without a problem. Now, Ghost Recon, you won't have to do that because that game is several years old now, but if you're running out of texture RAM, if you're running out of VRAM, you don't have to turn it down to low. You don't have to kill every detail setting. You just have to turn a few detail settings down. We are at 63 frames per second, 1% low. 99% of the time in this battle, we have been above 60 frames per second. 1080p 60Hz monitor, turn on VSync, you will have a smooth, steady gameplay experience. I love high-end hardware, playing with i9 9900Ks and 2080 Ti's. That's fun, they're cool, it's nice. But the reality is that's all luxury goods. You don't need it to play games. You don't need all the high-end stuff just to enjoy playing games like The Division 2 and Ghost Recon and every other game you can imagine. This computer will play everything. It won't do it at 4K Ultra, but it will play everything playable and it will look very nice and it's a great value for the money. If you came to my channel because you want to know how do I get awesome entertainment and maximum fun without breaking the bank and spending $2 grand on a computer that I can't afford, you've come to the right video. And here's a quick chart showing the performance numbers. These are the complete benchmark runs, not just the little bit of footage I showed you here because I spent several hours playing all these games. 83 frames per second average Assassin's Creed Syndicate, 101 Call of Duty Black Ops 4, 58 in Ghost Recon Wildlands, 158 in Rainbow Six Siege, and 90 in The Division 2. If anyone tells you that you got to spend $400 or $500 to enjoy some awesome, great games, if anybody tells you you have to spend over $1,000 for a gaming computer, point them to this video and say, no you don't. It's amazing what you can do with $580 in 2019. Thank you all so much for watching this. I hope you found those benchmarks interesting and helpful. They're just a small sampling of what is possible in modern current AAA games on this graphics card. You absolutely positively can play older games and esports games. I mean, if you want to play CSGO and League of Legends, I didn't benchmark those because of course they run just fine. This hardware is overkill for that stuff. But I hope you see that this is not obsolete hardware by any stretch of the definition. And $100 for that graphics card, if you want to be able to point to it and say, I got a deal, you found your deal. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you love it. Remember, subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, suggestions. What are you building? What's your computer? Do you agree with this? What changes would you make? That's what the comment section is for. I'm not able to respond to every comment, but I do read them all, and I certainly appreciate you leaving them. You will find the links, as I mentioned before, to all of these items to Amazon, Newegg, and eBay, because we got some used components down in the video description below. Affiliate links support the channel. Greatly appreciated. You can also support the channel on Patreon, Floatplane, and there's a few other methods down there in the video description below. Follow me on Twitter, and I will see all of you in the next video.